Okay, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook show on this, no music today, I know, sorry, on this another beautiful California day on a Sunday. So today is a Q&A show. So we've got a number of supporters who have contributed $25 or more a month and on a regular $25 program, who will be asking questions live via audio. Daniel somehow got a video thing. I don't know how. All right, cool. So Daniel will be on video. And we will, of course, open up for Super Chat. So the Super Chat is available. Again, highest priority given to the highest dollar amounts. Why's my camera doing that? All right, what the hell? Right, we've got more people joining, so this is good. This is a good group. We've got a good group here. And I'm pretty happy because Celtics swept the Philadelphia 76ers, so they're on to the next round of the playoffs, which is always a good thing. One second. Something screwy on my camera. We'll get that fixed. Always something. Yeah, there we go. All right. So let's start. Who was here first? I think Nick was here first. So we're going to let Nick ask the first question. Go ahead, Nick. Unmute. Anybody who's asking a question, don't forget to unmute. And then...
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, if I put on my headphones, I could hear you. There we go.
Okay, there we go. All right. So my first question, I was just thinking about, all the numbers you were throwing around the other day, and I was kind of amazed and happy with the growth of the podcast. And it seems like we're just scratching the surface with this thing. Before hopefully it takes off on the trajectory.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, have you ever thought of partnerships to leverage existing platforms? Like Peter Schiff would be one that you could think of, and that's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Any other ones that you can possibly...
Well, I don't know what you mean by partnerships. I mean, I'm not looking to partner with somebody because a partnership is, it has all kinds of complexities involved in it, particularly given the nature of the ideas. It's hard to partner on a regular basis with somebody. Certainly, doing more. I think one way to raise the profile of the show is to go on other people's shows, to have other people on my show, and to raise the profile over time by just getting new people exposed to the show by going on their show. So I definitely want to do something with Peter when he comes back to Puerto Rico and we're both there. I think we could do something interesting, maybe even be in the same room and go at it. I'm a little worried because we're going to disagree and we'll see what the dynamic of that is going to be and how exactly that works. But yeah, that would be fun. I would love, as I've said many times, there are a lot of good podcasts out there. I'd love to be on Sam Harris. I'd love to be on Brett or Eric Weinstein's. I'd love to be on Joe Rogan. Any one of these podcasts, Tim Pool, any one of these people would be fantastic. Of course, I don't control their guest list. They control their guest list. So it's easy to say, go on Tim Pool. I'd love to. Tim Pool has to invite me. So it's people like that and people within the scope of credible, right? I'm not going to go on an anarchist podcast, and I'm not going to go on a communist podcast, and I'm not going to go on a racist podcast. But other than those three, I'll pretty much go on anybody's podcast. So I'd love your help in doing this, you as all the listeners out there. And to the extent that you know these people, to the extent that you can contact them and encourage them to have me on, that would be great. The more exposure we get, the better. I am doing a lot of, the Institute has hired a PR agent, and I'm doing more radio now. So I did a couple of radio shows last week. I've got another radio show next week. So we're trying to do a bunch of radio, and I'm trying to get on television, although I don't think there's I don't think there is anybody on TV that'll actually have me on. I think I'm still banned on Fox for whatever reason, but I think Fox won't have me on. But we're going to try to do more television. So on those, but I think that the easiest, best way to grow is through podcasts. So rather than a partnership, what I'd like to see is just more exposure on those podcasts and have more people. I'll also be inviting more guests on the Yaron Brook show. So we will have, I'm hoping to have Bjorn Lomborg, the anti-global warming, anti-climate change, hysteria environmentalist, former environmentalist, on. We've got some other people lined up to come on the show. So I'm going to try to reach out and get some additional people to come on the show. And hopefully, again, that'll help expand the scope. But yes, there is massive amount of potential growth here. You know, we've got, I mean, assuming that people are interested, right? That's always an assumption. We've got about 22,000 people subscribed. There are, you know, they could easily be 200,000. We could easily grow 10x. And that would be amazing. That would be amazing, because that, you know, everything else would grow 10x. That would be fantastic. So I think there's still a lot of upside. We're just starting. Thanks, Nick. All right, let's go to Roy. And don't forget to mute when you're off and unmute when you come on.
Hi there.
Hey,
So my first issue is sexual harassment.
yeah.
From two aspects. One is the terminology, and the other is the legal ramifications. So I've thought about it. I'd like to tell you what I've been thinking, and I'd love to hear what your views are.
Sure.
I have a real problem with the term harassment. It's much too imprecise.
Yep.
It can encompass anything from occasional flirtation to persistent overt sexual advances.
Yep.
That's number one. So now you say then, okay, when does an action that has been labeled sexual harassment leave the realm of good versus bad manners and properly become a legally punishable offense?
Yep.
So one would think that, okay, if I look to the legislation, that's going to make a correct distinction, but no such luck.
No.
The company I work for requires its employees to take a sensitivity course, an online course, which includes a presentation on what the laws prohibit in the workplace.
Yep.
As I recall, it was the New York law specifically, but I'm sure they're kind of crazy all over. The long list of offenses includes complimenting someone on his or her looks,
Yep.
just about any form of physical contact other than shaking hands, and making reference to someone's ethnic background, even non-judgmentally.
Yep.
In short, what the law says is anything that might make the other person feel unsafe. And since unsafe in this context doesn't mean what you think it might, physically threatened, it really means uncomfortable.
It's emotional.
Which is such,
The emotion.
it's nothing. I mean, just I feel uncomfortable, I don't like it.
Yep.
So on that list of things that were offenses, I didn't find anything that I considered a proper subject for legislation. Those things that weren't downright preposterous
Yep.
were questions of manners, which should be dealt with by the employer's HR policy,
Yep.
including the situation in which a manager makes an overt sexual advance at a subordinate, strictly a company. Now, then it occurred to me, this is my final thought on this, and then I'll shut up and let you talk. So I thought about it. I concluded that one reason otherwise sensible people aren't rebelling against this nonsense, just as they accept or embrace the recently promulgated view of racism, is altruism, an automatic and exaggerated sympathy mixed with guilt for anyone who claims to be a victim.
I think that's right. I think there are two issues here. One is the altruism, and I think you're absolutely right in pointing that out. The other is something that in some ways is even scarier because it has implications that go beyond the issue of sexual harassment. And that is the elevation of emotion and the view that emotional harm, causing somebody to feel distress, is equal to physical harm. And you see that in the free speech debates on campus. You see that in the whole snowflake kind of, the students who are, if a speaker comes to campus and says something offensive, then that is really damaging to me, and that shouldn't be allowed because I'm being hurt by it, because the emotion of hurt is the equivalent of the triggering, as Jennifer says, is the equivalent of a slap in the face. It's equivalent of a punch in the nose. And the equivocation between emotional damage and physical damage is really, really, really dangerous, particularly with regard to free speech, but also, of course, here with regard to criminalizing or making illegal, in a sense, something, somebody being insulted, whether you intended to insult or not. So it is the elevation of emotion to, or emotional harm to the same category as physical harm. Now, there are cases in which emotional harm can be taken into account in certain lawsuits that relate to, but if I beat somebody up and there's also an element of emotional harm, I'm not sure how even objective that is, that emotional damages for physical harm, how much objective that is, and therefore whether it should even be counted in the courts. But certainly this idea that things you say, as offensive as they might be, is illegal in particular contexts, let's say in a space of employment, is absurd and authoritarian. And yes, a combination of both a rejection, implicit rejection of reason, and the elevation of emotion above anything else, and of course of altruism. And I agree with you completely. Now, to define when something actually constitutes when something actually constitutes harassment, real harassment, objective harassment, because I think there is something called harassment that is objective. So imagine if somebody, and let's take it even out of the workplace, but imagine if somebody persists, you keep saying no, and they keep going at you, and they get too close for comfort, and there's a threatening nature to what they're doing, then I think there is a place in which, yes, now you're at the point where you're violating my rights. I've told you to stop. I've told you to get away. You're in my space. You constantly are going at it. That is unacceptable, even outside of the workplace. Now, in the workplace, most of that is dealt with by HR, but in a case where HR doesn't, it's completely legitimate. If somebody follows you, if somebody is spying on you to bring in the police, what do they call it? Stalking. Stalking is, I think, a legitimate, if there's a real fear of violence, there's a real fear of disrupting your life, your physical ability to act, then stalking is a real crime. And I think harassment, properly defined, would be something like that. It will have to be persistent over time. You would have to have expressed that you'd want the person to stop, and it would have to be in some way intimidating, right? And then I think it is a crime, and then because I think it is a violation of rights. But you'd have to have, as you said in the beginning, you'd have to have very clear definitions about what constitutes harassment versus just being a jerk, right? Just being a jerk, or just being and something that HR should just deal with, or something that you deal with in the context of whatever society you have, and then the way that we deal with jerks.
Thanks.
Sure. All right, let's go to Daniel.
You've probably covered this somewhere else, and I apologize. Why Puerto Rico? I did a project there on the northeast corner, it's near Fajardo, Las Corobas, back in the mid-90s.
Yep.
And it was a pretty dangerous place.
Yeah. So, I wouldn't live in Fajardo. So I wouldn't live in the northeast corner. So the reason is taxes. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically, completely legally, and completely by the letter of the law, you can, if you have a particular type of business and a particular type of way to structure your life. You can take your tax rate from where it is now, where it is in California, over 50% marginal tax rate, to 4%, and even lower than 4% if you get significant income and capital gains. There's no federal taxes in Puerto Rico on income earned, generated in Puerto Rico, from work generated in Puerto Rico. And any funds that come in from outside of Puerto Rico into a corporate entity is only taxed at 4%. So if you get a significant amount of income and capital gains, tax rate is 0%. If you get your rest of your income through an entity, it's taxed at 4%. I was paying a lot of money in California. It would be one thing, not just to California, to Washington, D.C. It would be one thing if I had any ounce of respect for either the government in Sacramento or the politicians in Washington, D.C., and I thought they were doing some semblance of good with my money. But given my disdain for politicians, for what's going on in both Sacramento and in Washington, D.C., and the fact that I value my own income and that it fit my particular way of generating income, and then add to that, I live in a beautiful place. I wouldn't do it if I couldn't afford to live at the very top or close to the top of the standard of living in Puerto Rico. So I live in a beautiful place right on the ocean with a beautiful view, 3 minutes from the beach. I walk to the beach. I feel very safe. There's both private security and there's a lot of police because it's close to the tourist area. There's certainly places in Puerto Rico I would not live, and I wouldn't live. I really wouldn't live if I was going to live kind of anything below kind of the standard of living I'm living at. I wouldn't want to do it in Puerto Rico because it just wouldn't be comfortable. So there are definitely negatives to living in Puerto Rico, but there were a lot of positives.
Thanks.
Okay, Jonathan.
Hi, Yaron. I just wanted to first thank you for all the shows you've been doing, including the marathon, 500-like show, and so many others.
I just want to know if you stuck through the marathon and you were there for 2.5 hours.
I listened to it afterwards, as I often do, and I believe Ayn Rand talked about intellectual ammunition, and you provide a lot of that. I thank you for that and for the spiritual fuel as well. So thank you for that.
Sure, thank you.
I decided this year to sign up for the Ayn Rand Institute's Objectivist OAC program.
Yep.
And wanted to know if you could give me a little preview of what I can expect and maybe entice some of your viewers and listeners to join in as well.
Did you sign up as an auditor or full student?
I'm going to audit it.
Okay.
But as I understand, it's essentially side by side with the normal students.
Yes. Yeah. So other than homework, I think you get everything else the same. Let me just say, I don't really know that much about the program. I haven't taken it in this format, and I haven't really been involved in planning it, organizing it. That really is the purview of Onkar Gate and the team over there with Keith Lockitch and Ilan Juno and Aaron and Ben. So what I know is that you're going to get lectures on objectivism and on philosophy more broadly. I think that's part of the program, from some of the best thinkers that we have today in objectivism, and everybody who's taken it and who I've talked to has come back and said that their knowledge of objectivism has been deepened substantially, as much if they have studied objectivism for years. Sometimes there's the more you study, the more you know, and when you study it from great minds or from really good minds, you discover new new perspectives, new ways of approaching it, and so on. So it's good for everybody, but somebody who's relatively new, and in particular somebody who is interested in being an activist, a spokesman, somebody who's gonna help promote these ideas, somebody who either wants to be an intellectual full-time or part-time or whatever. I think this is a must. It really, really gets you deeper into the ideas, better integration, and it kind of pushes you to integrate, which is the real secret of doing this well, is to have the ideas fully integrated into your entire life and into every other idea that you hold and every other issue that comes up, it's easy for you to then connect and integrate and so on. So I think it's a fantastic program. I encourage everybody to take it as an auditor. And for those of you who really plan intellectual careers in the future, or for those of you who have the time, then I recommend taking it full time. I took the precursor to this, and I was lucky enough to be able to take classes at what was called then the OGC, the Objectivist Graduate Center, when I was a professor. And at the time, my professors were, I took classes from Leonard Peikoff, Harry Binswanger, and Peter Schwartz. And, that's about as good as it gets in terms of studying objectivism. So, unfortunately, none of those are teaching anymore, but you're getting the best that are teaching, and you're getting exceptional minds. So I think you're going to do really, really, really well. So, those of you who have never signed up, sign up. It's definitely worth it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for allowing me to pitch the OEC. All right, let's go to Ryan Schenk. And then let me say, while Ryan's unmuting, let me just say, don't forget to like the show, thumbs up on the show. That helps algorithms. It helps promote the show. That's great. Don't forget to subscribe. And of course, we are doing Super Chat. So if you're on YouTube, and if you're not on YouTube, you can come over to YouTube and you can ask questions there. I won't get to the Super Chat questions until I do one round with everybody who is dialed in. So once I finish with them, we'll go to the Super Chat. All right, Ryan. I can't hear you, so. Ryan, you there? Still can't hear you. I don't know why. You're not muted, but something on your side, maybe. Still can't hear you. See if you can figure out. I heard something. Ryan?
Okay, now you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, great. Well, I had an idea on something that might help get you on the Joe Rogan show. I don't know if you'd be interested in hearing it here, or if you would prefer an email.
No, it's fine. If it's short and you want to do it here, that's fine.
Yeah. If you allowed all your viewers to donate and on the Super Chat and say like Joe Rogan Fund or something like that, and it could go towards, you could set it aside, the money that comes in for that, and then offer Joe Rogan to give him the lump sum in, like, let's say a year and a half tops. And then he could either keep it or give it to his charity of choice. And just by having you on, and then you would give it to him.
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge there is that Joe Rogan makes so much money that I don't know how he would make it a sum worthy. Plus,
if it's like $10,000, let's say, and then, kind of pressure him into it in a nice way.
Maybe I worry then, maybe, and I'll ask around, but my suspicion is, and I'm not trying to knock this because I'll take any idea right now to get on Joe Rogan because I think the value will be terrific. My suspicion is that he'll say no because he doesn't want to be viewed as selling himself, right? That then other people will try to do the same thing, and he has cultivated this idea of independence, if you will, which I think the amount of money he has allows him to. So I'll ask around. I'll see if it's something that people who know Joe think would work, and I'll look into it. Thanks,
Cool.
Ryan.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
I've got a phone number here with area code 206. So introduce yourself and then you can ask the question. Area code 206.
That's probably me.
All right, go with it. Who is it?
You can still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear.
This is Ryan again.
Oh, it's you. Okay, that's fine.
So I don't know. Yeah, I already got mine.
Okay, so let's go to with Tom Keddy.
Hi, Yaron. Thanks. So I've watched several interviews and lectures on postmodernism by the philosopher Stephen Hicks.
Yep.
And I was curious if you had any thoughts on him in particular. I noticed that I haven't watched it extensively, but I noticed he is pretty much against postmodernism, but I've never heard him mention Ayn Rand or Objectivism as a counter to any of that. So I would just be interested in your thoughts on him.
Yeah, so I think his lectures on postmodernism are very good. I think his book on postmodernism is a good book. I think generally he's a pretty good thinker. So I would definitely recommend, if you want to learn about postmodernism, he is a good source to learning about it. It's unfortunate, and I've seen him do presentations in a variety of different places. I know Stephen, I've known him for a long time. I've seen him do presentation in a variety of different contexts, and he almost never mentions Ayn Rand, and it pisses me off to no end, because his whole framework, his whole approach, everything the way he approaches this is influenced by Ayn Rand. I mean, he considers himself an objectivist. He considers himself an objectivist intellectual, and you think, like, he did at least one, maybe two interviews with Jordan Peterson. Imagine the impact he could have had if he had talked about Ayn Rand to Jordan Peterson's audience. I mean, that would have been amazing, but he didn't. He never mentioned her name. And so somebody, whoever's not muted, you might want to mute, because there's just some noise in the background. So it's unfortunate, I think, that some objectivist, friendly intellectuals, academics don't make a bigger deal out of promoting Ayn Rand's ideas and attributing their own ideas, their own successful ideas, their own good ideas to the influence of Ayn Rand. I mean, that would go a long way, because thousands and thousands and thousands are listening to his lectures on postmodernism. They're clearly impacted by Ayn Rand, and yet they wouldn't even know it unless they did research on Stephen. Now, I have other problems with Stephen Hicks. He is I think, lead intellectuals at the Atlas Society, which is a organization that claims to be objectivist, but I think is in some ways anti-objectivist, or at least undermines objectivism. And we could, if anybody wants, we can really get into the differences and why and all that. But if you don't want to, I don't want to bore anybody with that, and I certainly don't want to bore myself with it. But I think there's fundamental ways in which it's a dishonest organization, and it's unfortunate that Stephen is heavily involved with this organization, and because it's, I think, dishonest. I think it's a fraudulent organization.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, let's see. Ori.
Hey, Yaron.
Hey.
So I've been reading Philosophy Who Needs It, and in the beginning, there's this part where they're talking about how you need to pick your philosophy, because if you don't, you're left with a junk heap of ideas integrated by your subconscious into self-doubt. And there's this line that says, your subconscious is like a computer, and its main function is the integration of your ideas.
Yep.
And now I'm kind of confused about this language of your subconscious integrating your ideas, because I thought integration was the conscious volitional action that we do in our minds when we, take first steps and integrate them into concepts, etc. So if you could clear up what that language means, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're assuming I can. I don't know, and I actually think there's probably some disagreement within objectivism around this. I noticed that Harry Binswanger has a view of the subconscious as being quite passive. It strikes me as that can't quite be right. So this is me. Again, maybe you can mute, because whoever's on, not mute, because there's some noise coming through. This is me. This is not objectivism. This is not Ayn Rand. I'm not a philosopher. My best understanding of how this works, which is, take it for what it's worth. Oops, somebody's dialing in. So see if you can mute. My view is, what you do consciously when you integrate, and you constantly integrate with your conscious, is you create certain paths, you create certain habits for your mind that then work in the background subconsciously. And I don't know how that works. And I don't think anybody knows how that works. But clearly, I mean, I'll be speaking to you on a show like this, and somebody will ask a question, and an integration between two ideas that I've never consciously thought of the connection between them will occur to me in the spot without me really thinking about it, consciously making the effort to integrate them. The integration has somehow occurred, or that those two are connected somehow in a way that I can access instantaneously. And it happens to me a lot, and it happens to me much more today than it did 20 years ago, 40 years ago. That is, the more you practice conscious integration, it seems to me that something in the background is happening that reinforces that, or mimics that, or uses the methodology without you consciously being aware of it and consciously guiding it. Now, sometimes it might result in junk, and that's why you have to be very aware, consciously aware of what your subconscious is feeding you. So sometimes in the middle of a talk, my subconscious will feed me something, and I go, whoop, nope, and I'll put it aside, right? And I'll go with something else because it doesn't make any sense to me. So consciously, I'm monitoring it. But the integration, the connection, the relationship, it was somehow established, subconsciously. And this idea that scientists, or I've even had it, I remember, particularly in the days where I would study math, right? So this is my engineering days, and maybe some of you can relate. You would go through an equation and try to figure it out, and try to do it this way and try to do it that way. And nothing, you'd work on it late into the night, and you just couldn't figure it out. And you'd kind of wake up with a solution, right? And so what you did in your waking hours was put that, make that the issue, show your mind some approaches to how to do it in a sense. So, program the computer, if you will. And then when you went to sleep, the programming took over and kept bouncing at it, and then fed you some stuff when you woke up. And given that it had the night to work on it, it figured out the solution. And I used to remember that. I mean, that used to happen to me a lot in engineering and in math and things like that, particularly if I really spent a significant amount of conscious effort on something, then it would just, the answer would sometimes just pop into my mind after sleep or after something else. So through introspection, that to me seems like what's going on between the relationship between your conscious and your unconscious mind, and between what you do consciously and what is happening in the background. So that is the best of my understanding. Now, I don't remember exactly how Ayn Rand answered that question. I think she did in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. I think Harry Harry has a different. I don't know how Harry exactly, but he has talked about this. He's written about this. Something he calls it the reactive subconscious. And I would definitely look into Harry Binswanger's work on this, because of all the philosophers, he's the one that's worked the most on it. But I know that there are others who disagree with Harry on it. So it's not something that's definitive and a closed issue in objectivism in terms of the discussions and debate. And given that Ayn Rand only talked about these kind of issues so much up to a point, it's not clear to me that the answer to this question is actually within the scope of what objectivism is.
Thank you.
That makes sense, Ori?
Yes, it's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, although I have to say, maybe it's just because it's above my pay grade. I don't spend a lot. I used to, when I was young, spend much more time thinking about these kind of things than I do today, just because I think other people are better at it and more committed to it. All right, let's go to Deborah.
Hi, Yaron.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So just a quick note on what you guys were talking about with the subconscious. Yeah. Ayn Rand talked a lot about interplay between the conscious and subconscious mind during the creative process in like introduction, or not introduction to the art of nonfiction, and I think also The Art of Fiction. So
That's
that'd
right.
be another reference for people.
The Art of Fiction and the Art of Nonfiction. She talks a lot about that. There's some in the Romantic Manifesto, but it's really in the creative process where she talks about that. And those are the those are the two lectures. They're not really lectures. They're more discussion groups. But you can get both of those, Art of Fiction and Art of Nonfiction. I think you can get them in book form.
Yeah. So my question is about mentions of Ayn Rand by serious intellectuals. I recently read The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, and I'm glad you recommended that book. It's a great book, very, very thoughtful and thorough. And but it brought to my mind an issue that I've noticed intellectuals like him, serious intellectuals, he mentions all kinds of Aristotle and Kant, unfortunately, kind of a lot, and Hobbes, and just any number of different intellectuals and thinkers. And I never hear him or anyone else on that level reference Ayn Rand, not even in a neutral way, like Ayn Rand said X and then Kant said Y or whatever. Just nothing, as if she didn't exist. And I just don't believe that these people aren't aware of her at all.
Oh no, they're aware. Steven Pinker's very aware.
It's almost like she's a taboo, or there's some reason why people don't want to mention her even tangentially as a serious thinker. It doesn't happen. So I'm wondering if you're aware of any exceptions to that outside of objectivist intellectuals who of course mention her all the time. And what your thoughts are on why she's regarded maybe as kind of a taboo, and why people won't mention her at all in their works.
Well, because I think that in academia and in among kind of the intellectuals, there's this general idea that she is, just not credible, that she's not a real philosopher, she's not a real thinker, or that she's so far out there on the right, and mostly the people who hold these kind of views of her as being a complete kook are usually people who've never read her. But there are enough of them who hold that I think the better people who might have read Ayn Rand, might have liked some, disagreed with other things, won't reference her because they're afraid of the backlash from those people, the people who think really poorly of her. I think that some of them also view her as a threat, in a sense that they know enough to see that there's something there, and that they would have to question a lot of what they think if they dug deep. And yet they don't want to question what they think, so they don't dig deep. So it's easier for them to evade her, in a sense, than to have to confront the fact that they don't really understand it. And if they wanted to understand it, they have to do the work, and that might challenge everything they believe in and question a lot of what they hold. Now, I think in Steven Pinker's, one of his books, he mentions her, but it's again in a negative sense, and it's a quick kind of off the cuff reference. And there is an interview, I think, with Rob Trasinski, where he interviews Steven Pinker, and they talk about Ayn Rand, and I think Trasinski tries to say to Steven Pinker that she's more serious and worthy of more attention than he gives her. But I don't think it's just too difficult for them and too risky for them. Jordan Peterson mentioned Ayn Rand. He's read her. He likes the books, but again, he doesn't get her as a philosopher. And this is true historically. I mean, Mises loved Atlas Shrugged, but wouldn't really engage philosophically. Hayek hated Atlas Shrugged and wouldn't engage philosophically. Almost no intellectuals out there who are not objectivists will engage with their ideas in any kind of serious way, in any kind of real way. I mean, there was the one exception I could think of that popped into my mind was a book I really like, The Cave and the Light. I don't know if you read that, Deborah. If you haven't, then it's definitely worth reading. And it really is, it's a book that basically takes an Ayn Rand idea and builds a book around it. And the idea that Ayn Rand first mentions, and then that Leonard Peikoff talks about, is the idea that all of history is shaped by, all of Western history is shaped by a battle between Plato and Aristotle. And The Cave and the Light, you can imagine the cave being Plato and the light being Aristotle, is a book that takes Western history and shows how it's shaped by Plato and Aristotle, and it's done very well, and it's quite good. And he has a few paragraphs on Ayn Rand that are actually quite favorable, and he recognizes the fact that she had this idea and she recognized the importance of Plato and Aristotle in this context. So it was quite good. But and I wrote to the guy when he published it, and I sent him some books, and I sent him a note for Leonard Peikoff thanking him for it, but it never heard anything back from him. But it's rare. It's very, very rare. And I think one of the real signs that we are breaking through culturally will be when academics engage with her ideas, even if to dismiss them, but engage with them honestly, right? There's a lot of people who engage with their ideas, but it's so flippant and unserious that it's hard to, but engage with them seriously and dismiss them, that, or engage with some of the ideas, say we like this, we don't like that. That's when we know we're winning. And that's, Greg Salmieri's book that he edited with Alan Godhelf the book is really geared towards those intellectuals. It's a study guide. It's, in a sense, how should a modern intellectual, modern academic view Ayn Rand's works? How it tries to translate, in a sense, the work from objectivism into modern, more philosophical language. And I think it does a great job of that, without whitewashing or without toning down or without watering down any of the ideas, but putting it in language that might be interesting for modern philosopher. And so I think there's hope. I think if that book circulates more, if more people engage with the ideas, then I think there is hope in the future that we'll see more of that. And there certainly is within intellectuals a sense of desperation, a sense that their ideas have not worked. I talked about this a little bit yesterday about Brett Weinstein. They know something is really, really, really wrong in the world, but they can't put their finger on what it is. And Ayn Rand explains it. And if they would only look there, and if they'd only be willing to take it seriously, their lives would be so much better. And they would have a greater understanding of the world around them. So maybe one day.
Okay, thank you. And this book with Salmieri and Gotthelf, are you talking about concepts and their role in knowledge, or is it a different one?
No, it's a different one. It's if Greg is on, he can tell me. Somebody will know what it is. It's this book that's really, really, it's on Amazon. If you put Greg Salmieri's name on Amazon, you'll find it.
I'll look it up. Thank you.
Somebody will mention it here, and I'll say it in a minute. All right, somebody help me out here. Find the book and let me know. Let's see. All right, who haven't we had yet? Let me just check. All right, got all those. All right, we're gonna go to Emmett.
Hunting for the mute button. Hi, Yaron.
Hey, Emmett. Oh, here it is. Wait. A Companion to Ayn Rand. A Companion to Ayn Rand Studies, I think. A Companion to Ayn Rand Studies by edited by Alan Godhelf and Greg Salmieri. And you've got essays there by all the leading intellectuals in objectivism. So it's the younger leading intellectuals in objectivism. It's an amazing book. Companion to Ayn Rand Studies. You can get it on Amazon or pretty much anywhere. All right, go ahead, Emmett, sorry. Yep, you're muted again. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I was watching an episode of Defenders, which is a Marvel comic superhero story on Netflix, and I know what you think of superheroes, and I get what I get what I deserve for watching that stuff.
It's okay.
But I found it really interesting in a kind of depressing, sad sort of way today as I was watching the episode. There were some, bad actors doing bad things, and the two of the 4 superheroes are starting to meet. And one is Iron Fist, his first name's Danny, and then Luke Cage, who's an African American. And Danny says that he was, roughing up one of the guys that Luke Cage protected him from because he was doing bad things. He was a cleaner, cleaning up a bunch of bodies. And Luke Cage invokes privilege and that they were just trying to pay the rent. and so they were just taking any job that they could get. And it was just really striking to me that concept of privilege has so permeated everything in just the recent years, and it's gotten into the art, that it's just kind of incredible to me just how terrible that is.
It really is, and you'd think that superheroes would be. I mean, I think one of the reasons people like superheroes is because, in a sense, it's an escape from that, and you've got heroes, at least, where the culture doesn't have heroes, and you've got good guys and bad guys, and that's an ad. But then for this PC, nonsense, leftist nonsense to start being introduced into that's just horrific. That's just horrific. And privilege in particular is one of the most nastiest concepts I know. It's an anti-concept, and it's really, really disgusting that it's being used like that. And to justify, of course, bad action,
Exactly.
Yeah. Only you who are privileged would complain about people looting stores. They're hungry. They need to loot the stores, or they're being oppressed. Of course they need to loot the stores. So,
exactly. So anyway, I decided that at that point I couldn't watch the show anymore, and I won't continue with the series, because when they introduce those kinds of ideas, I can't sanction it anymore.
Yeah.
So
it's a challenge because it's so hard to find good stuff, and it's so hard to find stuff that doesn't have that, and it doesn't have, and it has heroes. That has heroes.
Indeed.
I mean, I was watching. I just finished season 5 of one of my favorite TV shows. It's a French show. It's called The Bureau, and I can't remember if I think I've recommended it on the show in the past. And it's definitely got a hero, but it has to have a tragic view of life, right? So it can't follow through on the heroism. It can't follow through on the consistency between the moral is everything's, there's too much moral ambiguity. There's too much, and so bad things have to happen. And the ending of the show is just heart wrenching. The ending of season 5, you just want to give up. I mean, it's so well done, and it's so beautifully acted and beautifully shot, and the story is smart and intelligent, and I like smart and intelligent TV. And they are heroes, although there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of grayness, but they can't leave it alone. They can't just let the heroes be heroes and let the bad guys be bad guys. They have to introduce the consequence, and the consequences have to be horrific for the heroes. So it was just, as much as I enjoyed the show, the last 5 minutes, and I knew it was coming. So in a sense, it didn't bother me that much because I knew it was coming. But the fact that I knew it was coming upset me because it hurt my ability to enjoy the rest of the show. So, but I do encourage everybody to watch it. There are 5 seasons. It's called The Bureau. It's in French. It's on Prime, I think, on Amazon Prime, and it's on Apple TV, and it's a phenomenal show. It's one of the best written shows I've ever seen on TV, and so I encourage people to watch it. Just don't blame me for the ending of season 5. All right, thanks.
Very good. All right, thanks.
Sure. All right, let's go to Stefan.
Hey, Yaron, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear fine.
Awesome. Just before I ask my question, just 2 quick plugs. I was taking notes during some of the previous conversations. In terms of subconscious integration, if anyone here is a programmer or a software engineer, I highly recommend watching the video Hammock-Driven Development, which is, it's not from that philosophical perspective, but it's a lot of the same issues from a very practical perspective, and it's interesting. It's one of my favorite videos. The second thing is we were talking about The Cave in the Light, which is on my list. When you first recommended that, I noticed the author and realized that same author wrote one of my other favorite books, which I think you would actually like, and perhaps someone else would as well, which is called Freedom's Forge. It's about the role of American business in World War II, and particularly contrasts it with the division of labor between the government and business, and sort of who really deserves credit for America's huge war production.
When was that written?
Just a few years ago, I want to say like 2015, maybe.
Okay, so after Cave in the Light, I think. Wow.
Yeah, 2012.
That sounds like a terrific book. So yes,
it's fantastic. I definitely think you'd enjoy it.
Good.
All right. Okay, my actual question, and this is, I'll call back to one of your shows from a long time ago. I assume you talked about it on more than just a show, because I know you've thought about this before. But in terms of, it's about World War I, and I know that Ayn Rand in particular was very against America's involvement in World War I, which makes complete sense. But I think there is a sort of an interesting dilemma here, particularly if you imagine that take Wilson out of the picture in 1916, someone else better is elected. At that point, one of the precipitating events for the U.S. joining World War I was the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare by Germany against American shipping. And so I was just looking at the statistics because I was interested, and it looks like about 9 ships were sunk between that declaration and the actual entry of the declaration of war for the United States. And I'm curious, from your perspective, if you were put in that situation and you sort of had a proper view of government, what is the right move for America if not to go to war with this obvious aggression?
So, under those circumstances, I definitely think it's appropriate to go to war. So I definitely think that would have been the right thing to do. The challenge is this, that you have to figure out, why were the Germans attacking U.S. shipping? That is, were the Germans attacking U.S. shipping because we were clearly taking a side? Did we provoke them to do that because we wanted to enter the war? Is there some other way is there another way that the United States kind of encouraged Germany to do it? And I suspect the answer is yes. Now, I don't have the history right here at my fingertips, but I would have to go back and study it. But yes, once you're attacked, you have no choice. I mean, if clearly they are targeting U.S. ships carrying a U.S. flag, then your job is to go in and do whatever you can to stop the attack. And if that means going to war, then you go to war, right? And that would be necessary. I just am skeptical that was really the only option available.
Gotcha. And are you saying that you think basically that it was the fault of American foreign policy leading up to that moment, or that even after that point something else could have been done?
No, I think leading up to that point, it was probably the fault of American foreign policy.
Okay, yeah, I think that's probably fair. Okay, thank you.
And I think that's, to some extent, Ayn Rand thought that was true of the war with Japan in World War II. She thought that FDR basically wanted to end the war and provoke the Japanese into attacking Pearl Harbor. Now, I don't know if that's true. I haven't studied enough, but certainly she thought that. All right. Troy, I see you saying you send me an email with a question. I don't see the email. So I just looked through my email thing under your name. So unless the email is under a different name, I don't see the email. So I'm happy to answer the question if you want to resubmit it either by email or via the super chat or regular chat. I see you've made a generous contribution on the super chat. All right, let's see. We're going to do a couple of area codes. We're going to do 734, area code 734. Who's that?
Hi, Yaron, this is Jennifer.
Hey, Jennifer. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I just heard the other day, this is an expression people use, and I heard someone use it recently, the term creative destruction.
Yep.
To describe the generally positive progressions that happen in capitalism. But considering that the word destruction has, a negative connotation,
yep.
Do you think that term is really not the best to use to describe what's going on?
It's not, although it's very descriptive, and but it evokes a negative response because it focuses on the destruction rather than the creation. And of course, creative destruction means somebody is destroyed because of somebody's creation. And there's a sense in which that's true, but it's too evocative of zero sum. It's too evocative of war. So I agree that it's not. I don't have a good alternative to it. So I've even used it. It's a term that I'm pretty sure was coined by Schumpeter, the kind of the Austrian economist, basically to describe, let's say, what the auto industry did to the buggy industry, right? Through the creation of an auto industry, the buggy industry was destroyed. And it's a process that happens constantly in capitalism, the competition and new innovation and new entrepreneurship. Constantly, one set of products, a new technology basically outcompetes an old technology and takes it out of business. Creative destruction is, in a sense, it's a great way to kind of capture that succinctly. I don't have a succinct alternative for that. Yet I realize that Ayn Rand would have never used creative destruction. She would have never used that term. But she was a genius and she would have come up with an alternative. I am not, so I have no idea what the alternative would be. I mean, other than explaining what I mean by it, I don't know what the alternative is in something catchy, quick that would replace it. But the idea is, first you have creation, and then that creation outcompetes the existing products, and in that sense destroys it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I think the last one is 917. Area code 917. 917. Anybody there? You got to unmute. All right. Nobody home in 917. Okay. If that is the case, I am going to.
Hello.
Yep. Are you there?
Yes, it's me.
Okay.
Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good.
Okay.
Sorry, I had some trouble getting in, but I wanted to make one sub point before asking my question. Okay. You're addressing that fear that people, the intellectuals, have in response to objectivism. I think that's a major issue that's not getting enough attention, because when you were talking about Steven Pinker and all that, I mean, this is something that everybody who's trying to promote objectivism, I mean, laymen like me or intellectuals like you, obviously, we're all trying to do it on different levels. And we're constantly running into this wall of fear. And it is something that it's just a fact. And I'm sure you're aware of it and probably given a lot more thought, than I have behind the scenes. But it's something I think we could use leadership on, about how to, and you might be the only person to be able to do it, at some point in the future, but how to address and conquer people's, because I think you're almost underestimating the degree of fear that people feel when confronted with a philosophy that makes sense and that would undermine a lot of their knowledge.
Yep.
And it's just a factor, not to bemoan, it exists. Yep. And so how do we deal with it, and how do we get over it? And it'll be hard, but it's like, to me, it's something that's not being talked about enough in terms of, this is a factor, how do we deal with it?
I mean, I agree. And I think that's why Greg's book is so important, because at least for philosophers, Greg's book is meant to take that fear factor, or that, that preconception that they have about it out of the equation by trying to explain it to them on their own terms. So I think that book is crucial to that for intellectuals and philosophers. I think at every level, the approach needs to be different, but you're right that it's a big barrier that needs to be overcome.
Yeah, I think it would be a hack. We can keep on sending the material, but if they have a fear factor that they won't even focus on the material, then to be able to solve that would be a big hack. So onto my question. I wanted to ask you about the psychological implications of art, and the fact that, objectivism treats and considers art as a need.
Yep.
And I think properly, the view is that need is fulfilled by a particular form of art, romantic art. And the fact is that in our current culture, we are being starved of that form.
Yes.
Even though we do, thank goodness, have avenues to romantic art, museums and historical art and things like that, but there really is a dearth of it. And I think that the inference from that is that people are being starved of a need. And that would seem to imply some very big negative ramifications psychologically for people. And one thing I noticed during the protests is, there was like a naked woman with her splayed legs looking at a wall of cops, and there was a picture that went around. And I was thinking, this is almost like, I see this a lot, I think, with the protests, is people who seem to have like pent up creative energy, and they're trying to do some sort of performance art. Not to say they don't, they aren't serious about whatever the cause is, but some of it is very unserious in the way they deal with it. And it's almost just like performance art, and very ugly form of performance art. Yeah. So I wanted to, ask you, what do you think, or given the fact that we are being starved of the satisfaction of this need, I mean, what do you see as the consequences of that for people psychologically? And more positively, what would, in a rational culture where romantic art was the dominant form of art, how would that impact people psychologically?
I mean, that's a huge question. I mean, I think that the lack of, that is the absence of art, causes people to be poor psychologically, poor, in terms of their spiritual lives, in terms of their lives as conscious beings. And it's hard to explain what that means exactly, because I think most people are like this, so that it's all they know. But it's the absence of there's certain words in religion that are good for this. It's the absence of awe and inspiration, and in the religious words are not coming to me because I don't typically use them in my vocabulary. But it really is this emotional state of content and this motivation around being really super motivated about life. And when you see people around who are content with mediocrity, content with boredom, content with the absence of stuff in their lives, with just nothing in their lives, content with just going through the motions of living, that are not embracing it and thriving in it and just relishing their lives. That, I think, is part of the absence of romantic art. And it's not just the absence of romantic art, it's the fact that they don't know its absence. And so even if it existed and they wouldn't focus on it, it would only have a partial impact on them. But so you have to know that it's a need and go seek it out. And you have to make the concerted effort. If you look at the art that exists, because people need art. So even if it's not romantic art, they need art. So they consume it. So they consume Breaking Bad, or they consume, I don't know, whatever the latest superhero movie is. And it gives them a little bit of energy at some point, but at the end of the day, it depresses them, because what's Breaking Bad about? It's about the destruction of a human being's life and everybody who touches that human being, and everybody is destroyed. And what does that imprint on you as a human being, particularly if you're not very conscious of what's going on? It's that malevolent, dark view of life. And I think that's what we have in a culture. We have a culture of people with a malevolent view of life, a malevolent sense of life. Think about the American sense of life that Ayn Rand described. That is a sense of life that is romantic. Don't tread on me. I can make my life into what I want. I'm not going to stand for authoritarianism. And think about America under lockdown. Some idiot governor decides that you have to stay home, and not just to flatten the curve for the hospitals, but forever, basically. In New York City, we flattened the curve. Great. Hospitals survived. And yet we're still under lockdown months after we flattened the curve. And nobody resists it. Nobody questions it. Nobody challenges it. Nobody cares. because that spirit of get out of my way, I'm too busy living. It's not about the economy. It's not about any one particular thing. It's about living. Get out of my way. So that is what the spirit of romantic art gives you. You know, you see a good movie, a romantic movie, it should fill you with energy and excitement about living and about wanting to live. That's, you respond to that. So what would the world look like in a place that not only had romantic art, but that people appreciated it? It would be packed full with individuals living in the full sense of that word. It would be a place filled with energy, independent thinkers, you know, trying to create the best life they could for themselves. It would be America of the late 19th century without the baggage of America in the late 19th century. The energy and excitement and creativity and entrepreneurship and thriving. And yet much healthier than that, because I don't think that they necessarily in the 19th century appreciated what
the valuing of values.
Yes, it's a valuing of values.
The valuing of values.
Exactly, it's a great way to put it. So, and it's a value of life, which is what is life. Life is values. So it's a valuing of values, and and taking values seriously, right? Which means a value is that which one acts to gain or keep. Acts. So it's not just a fantasy. It's not just something I like. It's not just something I want. It's not just something I dream of. It's something I act to gain or keep. It's about the action. It's about constant action. It's about constant energy. It's about constant engagement, constant in living, which means in the pursuit of values. So that's what it's like. It's a feeling I think America had in the late 19th century, or most of the 19th century, but in the North. I think it's the feeling, and I know people will hate this example, but it's the feeling I got in southern China, you know, in the early 2000s when I went there, of people just pursuing life, going out there and doing stuff because they were free for the first time. But it's richer than that because the romantic art gives it much more. It gives you visibility into your own pursuit of values. So a lot of the action, let's say, of the Chinese or Hong Kong or places like this, where you got that sense of energy, it was material energy that didn't really go anywhere. And some of the complaints about these places, it's materialistic, it's shallow. There's a certain sense in which that's true. But if you add to that romantic art, and that's what the 19th century had, that gives you the full, you know, complement of what it is to be human and to strive and to engage and to live for the moment and for the future, to live every moment like it was your last, you know, in a real sense of that. That's what romantic art would do to a culture. And, you know, Ayn Rand said that if you hadn't experienced the late 19th century, the sense of life, the attitude, the culture, you could not imagine what it was like. And I think she's right, because I see even today, every decade seems like we're poorer in that sense, because there's less, even though the amount of romantic art is the same, it's out there, there's less and less appreciation for it. There's less and less consumption of it. There's less and less valuing of it. And therefore it has less and less an impact on people. And then of course, the educational system and everything else is more and more oppressive on them. And that's how you get to a situation where the population is willing to just, okay, we'll accept shutdowns, we'll accept whatever the authorities tell us to do. We'll just, you know, turn them into sheep, which is exactly what's happening. All right, let's see. So I think we got everybody on this on the Zoom. I'm going to do the super chat questions, and then I'm going to go back to Zoom, do one round, and that'll be it. So let's see. Isn't it a terrible way to measure worth? If I buy an item of $10, we can be certain the item is not worth $10 for either me or the seller. Also, how can one put a dollar value in the joy a happy child brings a parent? Thoughts? Well, a monetary amount is not something's worth to you. It's the market's, what the worth of that thing to the marketplace, right? In the marketplace. And Ayn Rand differentiates here between the market value and the value to you and to your life. I mean, think about it. Atlas Shrugged is worth in the marketplace, what, $7 you could buy a copy of Atlas Shrugged. But it changed my life. It's worth, you can't put a number on it, how much it's worth to my life, right? But the market price of something takes into account not what you will get from it once you've read it. It's selling it to people who don't know what it's worth fully because they haven't read the book. It has to do with competing with other books. It has to do with the cost of production. It has to do with a whole process that is determined by a marketplace. So there is definitely a difference between a market value, the value of something in a market, which is its economic value, which is completely different than the value to you. And that value to you could be different when you start the book, which could be very different to you when we end the book, right? I didn't know Atlas Shrugged was going to change my life. I didn't know its worth to me would be basically priceless once I ended it. I mean, how much money would I give? How much money would I, would I be willing to? You can't play the time machine game, but my life would be an iota of what it is without having read Atlas Shrugged. I mean, you can put a monetary value on it. There's just no way to do it. So, and by the way, there is I asked this question, almost exactly the same questions. It's just to give you a sense. I asked exactly this question of Leonard Peikoff in the mid-1990s. I was taking a course called Confusion Papers. And what we did was we would write papers about something we were confused about in Objectivism. And I asked exactly this question to Leonard in a confusion paper. And he gave a brilliant answer, which I'm sorry I can't replicate because I'm not Leonard Peikoff. It's just a brilliant answer, which exists on tape somewhere. The Ayn Rand Institute has it in the archives, and once in a while they play it for the grad students who take these classes. They have them read my confusion paper, and then they show them what how confused I really was. Leonard Peikoff always used to say, "You think you're confused. You have no clue how confused you really are. What your question reveals is XYZ, which you couldn't even imagine." But I think that's the essence. Now, Ayn Rand deals with this question in What is Capitalism? In Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. And she talks there about socially metaphysical value, objectively metaphysical value. She talks about it in the context of a market price and what is the worth of, what you can tell is the worth of something versus what other people can tell is the worth of something, right? She gives the example of lipsticks to a secretary. Of course, today that would be considered sexist and all kinds of things. But to a young secretary who's dating, who's looking for a husband, who's really interested in that's a focus. She's trying to keep a job. She's trying, she's doing that. Lipstick is incredibly, incredibly valuable to her. More valuable to her than an appreciation, let's say, of nuclear power and its potential to provide energy to the, and so on. But you, as somebody with more education who can step back and look at the world and see the value of nuclear power. So the whole concept of value is always in the context of to whom and for what. Now, in an economy, when you have to monetize it, when it's economic value, it's determined by supply and demand. And that is determined by what the rational people in the society overall think that are willing to pay for something in a particular context at a particular time. And it's in a sense, it's not an average. It's what the marginal person is willing to do. But there's a sense in which it's an average of that, right? But it's the rational people are willing to pay for it. But that doesn't reflect what the total value of something is. It's just economic value. And this is something libertarians, I think, conflate, and certainly Marxists conflate, is economic value with value. The two things are not the same. Economic value is a particular type of value. The actual value is something completely different. So yes, price is not a measure of worth. You don't put a price on your kid, on the joy you get from your children, right? You don't put a price on that. Price is a particular way of measuring worth in a particular context. And that is the context of a marketplace in which we are trading value for value. And then there's no option because you're trading something for something. You have to put a price on it, whether the price is in dollars or prices in barter or prices in time, it's a price. All right. Can you speak of how important Peikoff's course on objectivism through induction? I regard it as a supremely important. I do. I think it's crucially important. It's a major achievement in objectivism. It's a major step forward in the study of objectivism. It's a new. It's making. Somebody's got their. Somebody's not muted, so I can hear noises. It's a different approach than what we typically study. It's how Ayn Rand approached. How Ayn Rand created objectivism, but it's not how she necessarily explained objectivism. So he actually goes through the steps. So it's crucially important. It's also an advanced course. I wouldn't take it in the beginning. I would take it after you're already familiar with the major concepts in objectivism. You've done some work integrating them, and you want to understand more fully. You want to more fully integrate them into your life, and you want to understand, in a sense, where they come from, how you arrive at them, and how you can make them fully yours. So I wouldn't start with objectivism through induction. I would do that after you've taken things like understanding objectivism, the philosophy of objectivism, after you've read Opa, Objectivism through induction, Opa, Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. Only then would I take objectivism through induction. And it's a fantastic, fantastic course. All right, I'm going to take, and I'm going to, let's see. All right, is it possible to convince somebody to think rationally, or is it inborn? I've always been rational. Nobody taught me. I can't convince others. It's neither. I mean, I think you can convince somebody. I think there is the potential to convince somebody, but it's hard. But it's not inborn. Even with those you don't have to convince, even with those who are rational, it's not inborn for them. It is chosen. You have to choose to think rationally. And there is no why did you choose. You just have to choose. Now, you can convince somebody to introspect and consider that they should think rationally. But that is very difficult to do, because it means they have to really introspect, and they really have to engage with this faculty of volition, which many people just ignore. They just drift in life. They don't actually engage in self-awareness, self-control, self-guidance, everything that is the essence of free will. So free will is not something you have automatically. It's something you have automatically. It's not something you exploit, you use automatically. It's something that has to be, you have to will thinking, right? The ability is there in everybody, Why some of us choose when we're young to engage in it, I don't know. And I don't think there's an explanation for it. Now, some people are punished when they think, and therefore there's a disincentive for them to do it, and they shut it down. So I can imagine a 2, 3, 4-year-old who asked the why question to get on the parents' nerves, and the parents shut them down, or the parents slap them, or the parents do things to make asking the question why so painful that they stop doing it. That's how you destroy capacity to think, to be rational in the future. But the fact that you behave rationally towards your child, and you answer the questions and you treat them rationally, doesn't guarantee that they will make the choice to think rationally either. It's their choice. And you can influence it for the positive, but that won't guarantee that they make the right choice. All right, we're going to take one last Super Chat question. I know there are a lot of Super Chat questions. I'm going to do another round with our Zoom audience, and then we'll go back to these. On yesterday's show, you said the stock market, especially tech stocks, are overvalued. What metric do you use to come to that conclusion? I mean, I look at, straightforward. The basic metric I look right now is The economy is gone to hell. We've got, I don't know, I forget the number, over 10% people unemployed. Small businesses shutting down like crazy. The economy will take years to recover. Because of the stimulus package and what the Fed is doing, I think we're in for zero economic growth in the future. And the stock market is at all-time highs. Now, the stock market reflects expected cash flow into the future. And if I look into the future and say the future's bleak, it cannot be that, and it's not just bleak in the United States, it's bleak globally. Trade is in decline, globalization is in decline. I think economic growth in places like China is in decline. Where's this cash flow going to come from? How are these companies going to be that profitable? Now, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them could be, but the entire index, the whole S&P, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And then I look at the gap between the stocks that have gone up hugely since the financial crisis and what are called value stocks, stocks of companies that basically are still trading at 20% below, down for the year. And I look at that gap, and that gap is at the highest it's been since the dot-com bubble. And I say, you know, there's some disconnect here. It can't be that both are right. Either the value stocks are right and everything should be lower, or the tech stocks are right and everything should be higher. But both can't be right. And I suspect that the value stocks are right, things should be lower, because I look into the future and I can't see positive economic news. And the stock market should be reflective, at least to some extent, of future economy. Now, you can also look at price to earnings ratio and things like that. And by every measure like that, many of these companies are way, particularly if you look at forward looking, are historically at some of the all-time highs, or just based on ratios. All right, let's do this. Now, what I'm going to ask everybody is to make their questions short, because we're already at 1 hour and 20 minutes. And I don't want to go more than 2 hours. So let's try to make this quick. All right, we're going to start in a different order, because you appear on my screen in a different order. So we're going to start with Deborah.
Okay, I hope this is going to be quick. So my question, we were just talking about the stock market and how so many stocks appear to be overvalued. And it does seem really odd to me that the market is so high, considering the economic devastation that's going on. It just seems like there's a disconnect of some kind. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on why it's so much higher than one would think.
Well, I think there are two things. I mean, two things that are really driven by the same thing. There is a lot of what we'll call, there's a lot of money out there. And that money is being created from thin air by the Federal Reserve. And it's got nowhere to go. I mean, people are not consuming a lot. People are not spending a lot. And people are saving or putting it away. And one of the ways in which they're putting it away is they're putting it into the stock market. And that demand for stocks, that demand for somewhere to hold this liquidity, drives those stocks up. But the money, the liquidity that exists out there is artificial. It's being created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve, and you know, and it's trillions of dollars that are being created out of thin air. And it hasn't filtered into the rest of the economy in terms of prices, because we're not desperate to go out there and buy stuff. We're kind of sitting at home and not consuming much. And there's not a lot of, you know, demand for other products, but there is demand for financial assets, because we're trying to preserve what we have, and people are buying. And I think they're buying to some extent irrationally. And there are periods in history, you know, 1999 comes to mind, where people bought irrationally, and it happens. It doesn't last very long, but it can happen. Now, it almost always happens when the Fed spikes the bowl, if you will, like makes us a little drunk and makes us feel richer than we really are. The other aspect of this, so that's one aspect. The other aspect also relates to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, I mean, there are two more aspects of the Federal Reserve. One is, by keeping interest rates at zero, there's nowhere else to put your money with the hope of getting a decent return. You can't buy bonds, because bonds, you're getting a 0 or 1 or most 2% return. You can't put it in the bank, because you're getting what? 0.5% return, maybe. There's nowhere to put your money and gain something in return. So people's appetite for return goes up. Their willingness to take risk goes up. Their demand to get compensated for the risk goes down. And what you get is much, much more risk taking, which again drives people into the stock market and willing to buy stocks at valuations that a year ago they wouldn't have been willing to do, because they could have got something alternative with a decent return that was less risky. The third way in which the Federal Reserve is doing this, and notice this is all the Federal Reserve and some irrationality of people. The third way in which the Federal Reserve is doing this is that they have basically, and this is called, it has a name. Excuse me, it's called the Greenspan put. And what it means is that under Alan Greenspan, the message to the market was, we will not let the stock market collapse. We will do whatever it takes to bail you out. Now, under Greenspan, it never came to the Federal Reserve literally buying stock. But today, they're buying bonds, they're buying junk bonds, they're buying corporate bonds. Why wouldn't they buy stocks? There's actually a loophole. In the past, it's been viewed as it's illegal for the Fed to buy stocks. Now, some creative people have come up with a loophole that they think would allow the Fed legally to buy stocks. Other central banks are buying stocks. Why wouldn't the Federal Reserve buy stocks? So there's a general view in the marketplace that the Federal Reserve will not let markets collapse, and they include the stock market in the markets. So it can go down a lot. It can go down maybe 10, 20, maybe 25%. But if it goes down more than that, the Federal Reserve will intervene in one way or the other. And there's the potential today for them to intervene by actually buying stock. So people feel like there's no downside, or the downside is minimal. And there's only upside, and there's nowhere else to put the money. And there's plenty of money. So why not just buy, buy, buy? And that's what's happening. So it's scary. And it's scary that we have the Federal Reserve with this much power, and it's willing to use that power the way it's willing to use it. But it is the reality with which we're living. It's not good. Because it has to come down. And if the Federal Reserve pumps more money in it to hold it up, that has distortive effects. And it's hard to see the distortions. The distortions are not obvious. The distortions manifest themselves mostly in slow economic growth, in people not having good jobs, in wages not going up, in standard of living stagnating and maybe ultimately declining. It's going to manifest itself in a slow death. It's not going to manifest itself in a fast death. There's a sense in which fast death is better. Fast death is better. You get businesses shut down that are bad businesses. Now we're keeping bad businesses alive. We call them, there's even a name for it. It's called zombie corporations. You know what zombies are? Living dead. So they're dead, but the Federal Reserve is keeping them alive. And there are many, many, many companies out there that are basically dead, and that financial markets are keeping alive because the Fed is keeping alive, because that's the way, that's the world. And what does that mean when companies that are bankrupt are still producing? It means that we're getting lousy products. It means there's no competition. It means you're not getting innovation. It means capital is misallocated. It's not going to that creative destruction we talked about before. If you stop the destruction, you also stop the creation. So entrepreneurship is down. Business creation in the United States is down over the last 20 years. Many, many parameters are already bad for the U.S. economy. It could only get worse given what's happening. All right, Emmett.
Okay, I'm wondering, is there any reputable dating site for objectivists to meet other objectivists?
You're asking somebody who's been married.
I know.
30, what is it now? 37 years. That's a long time. Whether there's I don't know. How do I know? I have no idea.
Well, you're the clearinghouse of objectivist knowledge.
You should be worried about me because what's going on.
Right, thanks.
So no, I don't. So if you want to ask another question, I'll let you. But I guess that.
That's all I got for right now. Thanks.
All right. Let me just say again to Troy, I didn't get the email. Try to send it again or ask the question here. I don't see you asking the question here, so I can't answer it. All right, let's see. Stefan.
Hey, Yaron. So the theme of these questions is basically I write down questions I have on your previous shows, and it seems like they're mostly like a month or two out of date. So I apologize if the details are a little bit wrong. A while ago, you were describing, you were criticizing the conservative view of human beings as it pertains to government, as essentially where human beings are essentially corrupt and you can't trust them. And so that was sort of the reason why we have to be careful about government. You shouldn't trust government, all that kind of stuff. To me, in my mind, that at least the sense that human beings don't always make great decisions is the fundamental logic behind the separation of powers in the American system, or at least part of it. And I'm curious if you think that the American system's separation of powers into different branches and the essential sort of, in some sense, combat of the system of checks and balances between them is rational, and was the appropriate justification for them, if any?
I think it is rational. I think it is rational. I think it's very rational. I think it's the right approach to government. And there is a sense in which you're trying to protect the system of government from the worst of man. But what the conservatives assume, and to some extent, some of the founding fathers assumed this too, so I don't want to just blame the conservatives here. There was this assumption that human beings are flawed. Human beings are inherently sinful. This goes back to original sin and so forth. And that you want to, as a consequence, the people who come to power are weak and irrational and sinful, and you want to give them as little power as possible. I think that's a lousy reason to do separation of powers. And I think it's a reason that has led over time to the erosion of separation of powers and to the decline of the American system of government. I think it's because it's being defended on those grounds that it is eroded. I think the correct way of viewing it is that, there are at least two things. One is people are not guaranteed to be good. People are fundamentally can achieve goodness and can be good, but they're not guaranteed to be good. And it's not that the politicians are not guaranteed to be good. We, the people, are not guaranteed to be good. And we, the people, might elect bad people, or we might want our elected officials to do things that are against the Constitution or inconsistent with our true long-term interests. And if we create a separation of powers, we reduce the possibility of that, in the short run at least, manifesting itself in policy, in actual politics. But the assumption is not people are bad. You don't start with that. You start with people are good. You're creating a system of government for good people, right? And it's a system of government. Indeed, any system of government can only function as long as people are good. If people are truly bad, if people are truly sinful, then no system of government can withstand that. They'll always find loopholes. They'll always find it around it. And we've seen in the American system that indeed, as people lose the conception of good government, of proper government, of self-interest, self-esteem, freedom, that the government cannot sustain, the system of government cannot sustain itself. So it's based on the idea that if bad people get into power, or if the population becomes bad, the impact the bad people can have is limited. It also takes into account the fact that human beings are indeed fallible. That is that let's say a president can make a mistake, or a house you can convince X number of people of something mistakenly, but it's harder to convince more people of a mistake. That is, if you have checks and balances, it's likely that a mistake won't happen, because you have to convince rationally more people who can stop it if it truly is a mistake. So it recognizes the fact that human beings are fallible. So it protects us from bad people without assuming people are bad. It protects us from the fact that people can be fallible without assuming everything they do is fallible. And And it assumes that given that the basis of the system of government and the laws and the Constitution are based on reason and reality as they were, that to change them really means, and to introduce new stuff, really means you have to make a substantial argument. You have to have real evidence to make this change. It wants to make it as difficult as possible so that you really have to convince as many people as possible that this is right, given that you're starting off from a good point, that the system of government is good. But if you take the position of human beings are inherently flawed, reason is inherently, incomplete or fallible, but not just fallible, but you're going to, it's something that, you're constantly failing at. Then how did they even come up with the system of government, right? How did these sinners figure out a system of government as good as this, right? So you have to view it as from the perspective of a positive. And the whole point of the American system of government is that people are fundamentally rational and good. They're fundamentally capable of pursuing their own happiness. And we must create a system of government that leaves them free to do so, that indeed protects their ability to do so, protects them from the one thing that can harm their ability to pursue their happiness: coercion, force, violence against them. So the fundamental assumption behind the Declaration of Independence is the idea that individuals can live a good life in pursuit of their own happiness, can choose their own values. They don't need supervision. They don't need mother government to tell them what to do. So it's the negation of the original sin that makes the whole system of government legit. Right? So I don't think so. So that's why I criticize the conservatives for having that view, and I think it undercuts the whole idea of freedom.
I see. I guess one quick follow-up. So then, for the inverse problem of surely as a group of people who are in the philosophical minority and have a hard time convincing other people that our ideas are the correct ones, it seems like that also works the other way, in which it's if you have a society that is irrational, it makes it very difficult to actually do the right thing. And I'm just curious as your thoughts of.
I mean, absolutely. People ask me, Yaron, why don't you run for president? So let's imagine a world in which some bizarre way I became president, but nothing else changed, right? So I was president. You still had Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate. What could I actually do legitimately using the Constitution? Nothing, because nothing I proposed the House and Senate would abide by. They'd censor me constantly. They'd stop me from doing anything. The idea that politicians have power to change things, even for the better, goes against the very idea of the American form of government. The whole point of the American form of government is to make politicians weak so that they can't change things in dramatic fashion all at once. And so the only way we can change things politically is slowly, unless we have a revolution, right? So it's either revolution and you start from scratch and you write the Constitution and you have a new Declaration of Independence and you do it all, or you do it slowly. You start a third party, or you take over the Republicans, or you take over the Democrats, or you take over something and you introduce ideas slowly and you convince people slowly. But there's not going to be this one president who comes to being and boom, everything changes, because our political system exactly is the kind of political system where you cannot do that. And indeed, some of the places that have seen radical transformations towards free markets have been dictatorships, because that's where you can do it. You can, like Pinochet's Chile, right? And because he could do it, he could do whatever he wanted, right? But in a system of government like ours, you just can't do it. You can't get away with it. So what would be the point of being president if they handcuffed you? Right?
All right, thank you.
And Ludwig von Mises, one of my favorite von Mises quotes. Leonard Peikoff told me this story a long time ago. Mises was once asked, if you could become dictator of the world tomorrow, you would have complete power over the world. You could do whatever you want. What would be the first thing you did? And Mises said, resign. Because it's just, you can't force people to be free. You can't bring it from the top down. Freedom is not a top down kind of thing. People have to want to be free. And when they want to be free, who's president is less relevant at that point. Right? If they really want freedom, if Americans wanted capitalism, we'd have capitalism. You know, it's not about, then it wouldn't matter who became president. Good question.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
All right, we've got 917 area code.
You're on?
Yeah.
Hi. So on the show a little while back, somebody commented to you that objectivism is self-evident. And you pushed back on it, but you didn't really talk about it extensively. And I wanted to, I mean, I think that's a disastrously wrong way to think about it. I think that, you know, for Ayn Rand, it wasn't self-evident. It was developed as a process of reasoning.
Yep.
And I think that somebody who conceptualizes it as self-evident, I mean, one of the consequences of that is they're depriving themselves of the pride of having done the work to integrate that philosophy,
Yep.
which is very difficult to integrate. So I'm not sure what the motivation is in thinking of it as self-evident, but I think it's a very wrong way to think about it. And I wanted to just ask you to maybe expand on that.
I think that's right, and I think that it's an approach that denigrates philosophy, and it denigrates the role of philosophy, because nothing about philosophy is self-evident. I mean, think about philosophers the last 5,000 years since I forget the guy's name who was first philosopher, but it's a long time, 3,000 years maybe, or 4,000 years. Philosophy. Think about giants, geniuses like Plato and Aristotle. I mean, how many things did they get wrong? And they struggled with ideas, tried to figure it all out. And then think about the genius that is Ayn Rand, that took all the integrations over the last 4,000 years and came up with objectivism. And it can't be self-evident, because if it was self-evident, we'd have had it before Ayn Rand, right? Human beings would just have had it. I do understand it in some sense that what happens is, so some people tell me they read Atlas Shrugged and they say at the end of the book, yes, I always thought this way. This is me, right? And emotionally and psychologically, I believe them. I think that's right. I mean, that wasn't me. It was like I read Atlas Shrugged and it turned my world upside down. It challenged everything I believed in. I cannot say I held any one of Ayn Rand's ideas for true. Maybe I believed in reality. Beyond that, I don't think I was not religious. But other than that, I don't think I agreed with Ayn Rand on anything starting out. Right? So it was a complete, reversal upside, for me. But for some people, it's not. At a sense of life level and an emotional level, it was confirmation.
Yeah.
But they never go beyond that. They don't go beyond.
I think they might be connecting you on with a sense of life.
Yes.
And I can understand that they're connecting that, but I would seriously doubt that they thought of the ideas presented in Atlas Shrugged before they read it.
Of course not. And they will say that. They almost always say, I couldn't put it into words and she put it into words. But that even puts it down. I usually correct them and say, no, it's not just putting it into words. There's a whole system of thought here. There's a whole system of ideas. There's a whole interconnected philosophy here. And you didn't have that. You had an emotional response, a psychoepistemological response, a sense of life response. And you already had that sense of life. And you might have already had the political ideas, or some of them, or a particular view of life, or you were in some implicit way kind of an egoist, but you didn't really know that. It's all possible. But this is philosophy. This is a conceptual system. This is a system that requires discovery, development, and for any one of us, integration, understanding, study, real work. Nothing about objectivism is self-evident, because everything is related to everything. So any one aspect of it requires so many integrations that it is unless you put in the work, there's always going to be parts of objectivism that are going to be floating abstractions for you. There's always going to be part of objectivism that is not really going to connect for you. And you risk being, I think a lot of people leave objectivism because of that, because it's not real for them. It's not part of their life. It's not fully integrated into their lives. So I agree completely. There's nothing, literally nothing self-evident about objectivism. Even A is A. If that was the sense in which it's self-evident. But if it's so simply self-evident, then why do most philosophers don't think A is A? A lot of smart people don't think A is A. So there has to be something that requires work, even in identifying A as A, right? So, and that took Aristotle, a genius of all the millennium, to say A is A. It's not a trivial thing. And if that's not trivial, an axiom like that, then nothing is. So yes, I absolutely agree with you.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Daniel.
So where's the economy going to be 5 to 10 years from now? Because on one side, you've got technical businesses like ours, and we find people working at home are more productive than ever before. Yeah. And certain restaurants are moving out of the city where they pay a percentage of receipts as rent into the suburbs, and they're delivering their food in and doing very well for themselves with less employees and better profits. But on the other side, 25% of the people are unemployed, and the government, forget about protecting individual rights. The government is violating rights at a rate that we've never seen before in America. Yep. Where are we going to be 5 to 10 years out?
So I think that we're going to be very bifurcated. I think that this whole discussion of inequality, which I always say, is irrelevant and not important, but there's a sense in which it's irrelevant, in the sense that the government creates it. The government explicitly creates it. And the government is creating a more and more bifurcated world in which we live. The technology world has a certain momentum to it, and it is still relatively lightly regulated. But even there, we're going to see more regulation of tech. Certainly the big tech companies are going to be more regulated. If this administration and the next administration, whoever, continues to restrict immigration, then you're going to see less and less talent coming to the United States. And we know how much of Silicon Valley and the technology business is immigrants, and the best from all over the world. If capital continues to be misallocated, then at some point there's going to be real shortages of capital going to the best ideas. And there'll be less entrepreneurship. I think even today, when I talk to venture capitalists over the last 10 years, they would say, it's not like it used to be. It's less dynamic, it's less innovative, and there's just not the same spirit that there used to be. And some of that is from the capital side, and some of that's from the kids coming in, and some of it is from just the fact that there's more regulation now, even in Silicon Valley. So my view is 5, 10 years from now, certainly there'll be some businesses that are still making good money. There'll be new innovations. We'll have iPhone version, 12, 22. Apple will still probably be a very successful company. Who knows, Facebook, Twitter, I'm not going to make projections like that, but there will be new innovations in technology. Some people will have made a lot of money. Some people, their productivity will be increasing dramatically. We'll have more robots. We'll have more AI that facilitates increased productivity in certain sectors, in certain areas. And indeed, that's what's saving us. I think what is saving the United States right now, what's saving the world right now, is that we're at this interesting intersection where technology has the potential now to dramatically boost productivity through robotics and through AI, at the same time as government is destroying other forms of increased productivity. So that's going to be the battle. Are the destruction forces greater than the productive forces? And it's hard to be optimistic. So, but I don't see a collapse. And the reason I don't see a collapse is because I think those productive forces are so strong that it's hard to destroy them. It's hard to really knock them out for a loop so that they don't have an impact. But some restaurants are moving to the suburbs and they're going to do fine. A lot of restaurants are never going to open and never going to find a place for themselves. I was just reading an article about New York. All the cultural institutions in New York are shut down. What is going to happen to all the actors, musicians, singers, comedians who used to make a living? And who knows if they'll ever be able to make a living again doing what they used to do, right? So what happens to our cultural institutions, which are a real value to us? And one of the reasons we love cities, particularly if everybody leaves the cities, can those resurrect themselves elsewhere? Is there, because they require economies of scales, they require a certain mass of people. They cannot be phenomena just to the suburbs. Will we get them more online? Is there a way to monetize that? You know, who knows? I think we're going to be, in 10 years, we're going to be in some ways poorer, in some ways richer. Technologically, I think we'll be richer. Overall flat. And I think the poor, the old, the less educated, are gonna disproportionately suffer from the next 10 years, just like I think they did over the last 10 years. I think that everything that happens right now is disproportionately hurting the poor, or the less productive, the less educated, the less able to pack up and move to wherever the jobs are, less able to pack up and move to, to the suburbs, and the people who are pacified, whose motivation is destroyed by the welfare state. You know, government is saying, "Oh, the stimulus check is going to arrive any month now, so don't leave, because you don't look for a job because you're going to get money for free." Those are the people who hurt the most. So the people who are doing well right now will continue to do well, I suspect. So people who can work from home, tech people, lawyers, accountants are going to do fine.
The other good one is maybe we'll see more privatization of education as people seek out schools for their kids.
Yeah, I mean, that, if there's a backlash against, and if there's a disruption of institutions that just assume the government runs, that'll be the most positive thing that could happen out of all of this.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, let's see, Ryan. Can you hear me good? Not good, but I can hear you. Maybe I'll turn on my speaker.
Daniel actually just talked about privatization of education, and you've talked about how important, obviously, that is. Changing that seems like such a long battle. I mean, we can try to get people to become teachers and that kind of stuff, but is there any kind of quicker fix that you could see? I actually asked you a question on a super chat recently about like a lawsuit. I mean, it'd have to be like a big one, kind of like the recent one where the public employee didn't want to have to become a union member, sort of thing.
Sure.
And then that has broad effects because of that. So like
how the lawsuit would actually go, whether you would win the lawsuit. I think the quickest thing that one can do is something called the education saving account, which Nevada passed, and it's in the law. It's in the courts right now with the teacher union suing over it. And I haven't read recently about where it's going. But education saving accounts are a fast way to lead towards privatization without going out there with a banner for privatization, right? So without scaring people around privatization. So it basically says, here's the money we would have spent on your kid in a public school, in a government school. You can use it to send them to government school, or you can use it to send it to any private school, or online, or homeschool, or whatever you want. Anything related to education. That's the revolution. That's what we should be advocating for from political perspective. Other than that, I think the other way is to look at some of what Objectivists are doing. I mean, Higher Ground is run by Objectivists. It's the largest Montessori school system in the world. And it's run by Objectivists. They train their own teachers, and they develop their own curriculum. and it's massive. There's another company that does science curriculum, and they're in hundreds and hundreds of schools, right? So you can create scale, private enterprise scale in education, and that's what entrepreneurs should look for to do, and in changing the curriculum and in changing the actual schools.
On a narrow level, do you think, like, when I went to school, like K through 12, there was some, bias, of course. Even when I went to the UW, there was some bias, but it seems worse these days. And like, to the extent that kids are sort of indoctrinated, do you think there's a free speech issue? I mean, like, people are forced to pay taxes, send their kids to, high school and before, in grade school.
I think there is, but I don't think anybody would recognize it as such. So I don't think you could win in the lawsuit.
Okay.
It's too subtle of a point, and government schools are so entrenched, and we're so entrenched early on, even when there was respect for free speech, that I find it hard to believe that there's any court in the land that would see it as a free speech issue. Even though I agree with you, it is. I don't get to choose what my kid studies. I don't get to decide which school they go to.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ron.
Sure. All right, Roy.
Yeah, two quickie questions. One is, a few weeks ago, you spoke very favorably about Bulgaria, which piqued my interest. And so when traveling once again becomes a thing, you've focused on the economic environment, the free economic environment there, which is not my interest. My interest is art museums, architecture, and of course, restaurants.
Yep.
So how is Sophia on those fronts?
Okay. What's the second? Oh, okay. I wouldn't go.
Okie dokie.
Not interesting in particular on any one of those fronts.
Okay.
There's some history there which regards, but the history of, being part of the Ottoman Empire and the conflicts around that, and then more modern history around communism and the liberation of communism. But in terms of restaurants, the kind of restaurants I know you like, that's not the place. And in terms of architecture, there really isn't anything, because it was Soviet for too long. The 19th century architecture, some of it's interesting, but it's derivative. It's not original, and there's nothing modern really interesting.
I'll cancel my reservation.
Yep.
Okay, the second quickie. Are you familiar with the TV comedy series, situation comedy series, Episodes? Episodes.
I think I watched the one or two. It's about, what's it about? Remind me.
It's about a British husband and wife team of writers.
I started watching it. I couldn't get into it.
Really?
Yeah.
Of course, it's back. They're replaying the 5 seasons, and I rewatched seasons 4 and 5.
You liked it?
And I still like. I think it's very funny, very smart, very witty.
Good. I'll look it up.
Give it a second chance, maybe.
Give it a second chance. Thanks, Roy.
Right.
All right. Let's see. Who have we not had? Nick.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, if you can talk about the Atlas Societies at some time on another show, it'd be great.
Another show. Too much would take up too much time right now.
No, yeah, I'd like to get a complete. You got a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that we know nothing about, so it'd be super interesting. And there'd be a lot of questions, I'm sure.
Yep.
I thought you had a hands-off policy in terms of other objectivists not to talk about. They're not.
I'm willing to engage with the fraudulent ones.
Okay. Should be fun. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, so
we'll do that. Now, my question.
Yeah, go ahead.
My question is have you ever given consideration to advertise on the Wall Street Journal, the digital edition? I mean, I'm not talking of, not necessarily you get a lot of numbers, but you might get a lot of high net worth people who might make, some significant contributions, expose.
Yeah.
a lot of the topical issues of the day, whether it's Black Lives Matter, white fragility, would interest them. Did you ever consider doing that?
I haven't. My expectation is it's very expensive. I mean, a long time ago, the Institute put out full-page ads in places like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. And there was an initial very positive response, and we got some uptick, but it never really lasted. We've also bought, at the Institute, we bought lists from different places. It's just always been very expensive. Now, I haven't thought about doing it on the online edition and what that would cost. I'll look into it. I'd look into it in terms of what it would cost to do. But most of the people who have grown their footprint and podcasts and YouTube channels and so on have done so organically. And I'm trying to see how much I can do organically before I invest in advertising.
Okay, something to consider. Thanks.
All right. Who haven't I had? Tom. Tom, have you asked the second question?
Not yet. You're
okay. Okay, so I think it's all right. Go ahead.
So thanks again for everything. Is shrugging passive aggressive? And if so, does that create a negative connotation that has the potential to detract from the message or the lesson that it's trying to convey?
Yeah, but the point of shrugging is not to convey a lesson. The point of shrugging is to shrug. The point of shrugging is to say, I've had it. I don't want to play this game anymore. I'm not going to participate in exploitation of in my own exploitation. I'm not going to be a part of the system. I'm going to be separate. I'm going to go away, and I don't care what people learn from it or don't learn from it. So I don't think that should be a consideration about shrugging. And I think it's only detracts if it's badly explained and badly argued for. But to the extent that it's explained well, then it's clear why you're doing it, and these are the reasons, and people can learn from that. So no, I think shrugging is not cynical in that sense, and it's not passive aggressive. It really is, I've had it. Because I don't think you should do it unless you've had it, right? Living in society, working, producing, is too good, is too beneficial to give up on, unless you've really had it. And I can understand really having it, you know. So you have to, and at that point, it's not passive aggressive. It just is. It's, you know, I'm not willing to be part of the system anymore. And generally, I think you should minimize your engagement with the system, right? That's why I don't think objectivists should call themselves Republicans and Democrats or be part of this group or that group that is compromising on what they are. I'm not saying don't register as a Republican, but don't self-identify as such, because I don't think you should be part of any. I think we are, in a sense, the only way we can fight the system and the culture is to be separate from it and to be step out of it. Now, participate to the extent that we have to, and to the extent that we want to, but I self-identify as outside of it.
So how does that relate to? I think it's Lyft has now left California, right?
No, they haven't. The courts said that they don't have to treat the employees, the drivers as employees, so they're staying for now. But they threatened to leave. They threatened.
Right. So my expectation was that they were planning to shrug in that sense, so that California would change, so that they would come back. Right.
Yeah, but that's that, I don't know. You might want to mute just because I'm getting feedback. That's not real shrugging. So yes, that's a little shrug, right? That's yeah, the regulations you posed on me are such that I can't do my work here anymore, so I'm going somewhere else. A real shrug would be Lyft shutting down, and not saying I'll come back when we have capitalism. But it's not one little law. You guys are eating at me. You guys are leeching off of everything that I do, and I'm gone. That's real shrugging. I mean, lift is nice, and we like to use the term shrug because it's convenient and everybody gets what you're doing. But that's not what I mean by actually shrugging. Yes, I think lift is a little passive aggressive, and it goes back to my comment about people being so upset about masks, right? So taking 50% of your income, cool. Regulating every aspect of your life, cool. Shutting yourself down during a pandemic, cool. What is it with Lyft? Regulating you, taxing you, the SEC, filing, hiring lawyers, all of that is fine. But you turn my drivers into employees. Oh no, that I can't tolerate anymore. Like, they own you already. And if you understood they owned you already, shouldn't you just truly shrug, which is mean to shut down the company completely and walk away? And not say, if you change one law, I'll come back. If you change everything, I'll come back. That would be what I would consider really shrugging, and what Ayn Rand meant in Atlas Shrugged by shrugging, right? So this is like, okay, one more thing. This is too much for me to bear, so I'm leaving for a little while. And if you make me a little bit less of a slave, I'll come back. That's not the shrugging in Atlas Shrugged. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I assume you think Elon Musk isn't going to follow through either, right? Leaving California.
I doubt it. And again, it's so partial. It's so in the weeds. He takes hundreds of millions of dollars from the government to build and to create his company. It's the only way it even happened. And then he's upset because they told him not to open. They told everybody else to close. But it's just, he picks and chooses which regulations and which offensive things the government does are too much for him. There's no principled opposition to the intrusion of the government into our lives. That's what Atlas Shrugged is. It's the fact that the unproductive are leeching off of the productive in a million different ways. And I'm leaving to stop that. None of them recognize that. None of them have it as a principle. One day the government pisses Elon Musk off, so he says he's going to leave. The next day they give him 100 million, so he stays.
Yeah, I don't see him as someone that has a lot of credibility anyway. So,
No.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, I think Ori is the last one. Ori, go ahead.
So considering all the positives going for tech, the fact that it's the main area where there's still a lot of innovation, the fact that it's the least regulated, as you mentioned, and that it's the area that's been least harmed by the pandemic, in some ways even benefited because I mean, everyone's ordering from Amazon now, everyone's watching Netflix.
Sure.
And the fact that there's so much liquidity in the market, as you said, and at the first sign of trouble, the Fed's probably just going to dump more liquidity into the market. Do you think it's possible that the tech prices actually stay high or even go up for a good amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't time the market. Yes, for all those reasons, it's possible the tech prices still go up. I don't know when. All I can say is if you look at future earnings, even for Amazon, if you look at future earnings and you do a discounted present value to today, it doesn't add up. Now, I don't know how much it would have to go down in order to make sense. I mean, look, I did this exercise on Amazon in 1999. And in January of 1999, I came to the conclusion Amazon was way overpriced. And I literally bought put options on it. Now, it was a year too early, and I rolled the put options a couple of times. So I bet on Amazon going down, and I lost all my money. But in March of 2000, Amazon went way down, way down. Now, ultimately, did it come back to the levels of 99? Yes, and went way above that. But the fact is, in 1999, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the price that it was selling it, because people weren't taking account any risk factors. They weren't taking account any possibility of failure or stumbling or anything like that. And it turned out that Amazon didn't stumble. They didn't fail. Everything went perfectly. But that's 1 in 1,000, right? And so out of 1,000 tech companies, Amazon was the one. If you can identify that, then you'll make money. But at this point, can we guarantee that these particular stocks are going to live up to the evaluations when we look into the future? I think the answer is known. Now, I haven't literally done the exercise. I'm projecting, but I think, because I know people who have done the exercise, that they're overvalued given any reasonable projection of the future in terms of cash flows. That doesn't mean that they won't ultimately outperform. It just means that you cannot make a rational argument for them right now. And I can't tell when they'll come down. So again, I bought put options in January of 99. The NASDAQ went up in 1999. What was it? 90%? Something absurd, right? Went up 90% after I thought it was already overvalued. And then it went down much more than that, from March of 2000 on. So I was right ultimately, but I wasn't right in a way that could make me any money.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. I'm going to take one super chat question because it's a $20 question. The other ones I'm going to keep and I'm going to answer in future shows. And I've also got an email question that I'm going to answer in a future show. So either Monday or Wednesday, I'm going to answer these. So the schedule's changed. Shows are going to be Monday and Wednesday, 8 p.m. East Coast time. Monday, Wednesday, 8 p.m. East Coast time. And then Saturday and Sunday. And, and so instead of the Tuesday, Thursday. All right. The question is Mont Pelerin Society still active? Have they ever made a significant contribution to the advancement of freedom, or will they? Yes, they're still active. They've been, hampered by the pandemic. So for the first time in Mont Pelerin history, they did not have their biannual conference this year. It's supposed to be next month in Norway, and it was canceled. So it's definitely slowed them down. Did they make a significant contribution to the advance of freedom? Depends what you mean by significant. I mean, I think it's more of a club for intellectuals who believe in free markets to get together and motivate each other, learn from each other, challenge each other. They're not, and they don't have as a mission to affect the external world directly, only through making each other better. And it's a great networking place, and it's a great place to hear some of the leading minds in the free market world. But that's it. So I don't think they have a direct impact on the world becoming freer, unfortunately, in the short run. And will they? No, not beyond the advantages we have by networking. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Don't forget to become a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, don't forget to financially support the show. If you're not yet financially supporting it, you can do so on yaronbrookshow.com/support. And I will see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow is Monday at 8 p.m. East Coast time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the support. Thanks for all the questions. Bye, everybody.